So tell me, Eddie, what don't people know about biodiversity that's happening in streams, lakes, rivers, water systems that might impact their life in the future or that's changing? What's changing in that landscape and does everyone need to know about it?
When you say biodiversity and when people think about biodiversity, and if we don't talk about large things like plants, like trees, like koalas in Australia or any vertebrates elsewhere, if we say let's talk about biodiversity of little brown things like invertebrates, they usually think about bees. Maybe they think about butterflies. But the thing is that most of the biodiversity of animals is made by insects, in particular, mostly beetles, and that they make up 95% of all species.
Wow.
So if we speak about biodiversity of animals, it's insects and little bit of sprinkle of everything else.
So I've noticed every Christmas, the Christmas beetles aren't really there anymore. Nowadays, we get maybe one or two Christmas beetles, as where we used to get many. And some people might say, oh, that's their population. They come and go in cycles. Other people say, oh, we're actually losing all of our beetles. What is it?
I think what is changing, and there are two things that are changing. Both of them are coming from humans. So what is changing a little bit slower is the climate, and that's kind of undeniable. And with that, it's a tectonic shift of basically old systems. But on top of that, we very rapidly getting rid of other animals' habitat by building houses on top of their habitat, by making roads through their habitat, by taking water out of the river. And we try to kind of if you look at housing, for example, like the government reports very excitedly that they made room and made it easier to build 500,000 houses or whatever they've built,
Mm.
which is great. People need to live somewhere, but it usually means that they made it possible to release the land where houses can be built. And federal minister for environment would say, and we made sure that the environment does not suffer. Well, or is minimum. It's almost impossible to achieve, I would say. Unless you build something multi-story, not like what we built here. But that's specifically about housing. Yeah, we do a lot of things that basically display a lot of other animals, including insects, including Christmas beetles. Should we be depressed about it? We should be really cautious about it. We are another species, as an argument goes, and the planet will probably exist still, but we are affecting our own habitat.
Yeah.
So it is true that the count of many insects has dropped down, and it's been reported as insect Armageddon. You probably have heard that term. And by some accounts, the abundance of insects has dropped by something like 70%. Maybe it's not dramatic in everywhere, but it certainly is this dramatic in some places. And it's not just in industrial places, like it's been measured like outside of national parks and even within national parks. And anecdotally, we can probably notice that when we drive through the country, we don't have to scrape insects anymore when we stop at the server. It used to be almost impossible. Like so many insects on your front screen, on your window shield. And now it's like, oh yeah, maybe a few, maybe one or two.
I'm really glad
That's
you mentioned that because that's also something that I've noticed 100%. And when I've talked to other people, they may be like, oh, yeah, I guess so. I'm not really sure. But you're
it's
out
interesting
there
that, yeah.
studying these numbers. You're out there looking in streams and rivers, and you've been a part of this field looking into this for so many years now. So this is why we've got you here to understand this a
Mm.
little bit more deeply.
Well, specifically, yes, I work on freshwater invertebrates, and the biggest factor that affects freshwater invertebrates is the presence and volume of water. It's as simple as that. Uh, we are quite a dry country, and a couple of years ago, when there was La Nina, and all of a sudden I get this invitation to speak about invertebrates because people were driving in what is this? In Australia, there is an area called Riverina, like river country,
Yeah,
basically. I
Riverina.
think it's next. Yeah, yeah. And the host of the radio program said, "Oh, I'm driving to work at my windscreen is completely covered with bugs now this year. That's what I've noticed." And the puzzle is not really a puzzle. It's like if you've got more water lying around, then you've got more insects breeding in it. And they power all the predatory insects. It's just the whole kind of the ecosystem wakes up, just like you see spring flowers come up when it's wet. It's the same with insects. It's presence of their habitat. But yes, I have listened to a talk on modeling, specifically on climate change, and because we're getting warmer and we're getting drier, there will be, even if we apply a lot of kind of protective measures, as in we revegetate the banks of the streams and we minimize the pollution, the invertebrate communities, freshwater invertebrate communities will still be affected. There is no question about that. And primarily, very first groups that will be affected are alpine insects that are studied. So there is a quite an ancient group called stoneflies. They in northern hemisphere they hatch from the river, like the juveniles hatch when the snow is still present. In Russian, they're called spring flies for that reason, because you see them a very early spring while it's still snowy. And there is one species here in Victoria that does exactly that. It hatches when snow is still on at Mount Donabew.
Mm.
So that's interesting. There are also this amazing, really large predatory stoneflies that also live at a very high altitude. They are kind of a quite primitive too, and they can be primitive because they live in this very cold mountainous springs with plenty of turbulence and very, very cold water. So there is a lot of oxygen saturation there. So if you look at their gills are very unsophisticated. Rather than being like really, really feathery and moving, it's just like little blue sausages hanging off the side of their abdomen, really very primitive,
Okay.
because they don't need to evolve. But if we change those conditions, if the water becomes warmer, then the oxygen saturation will decrease. If the water becomes the water volume decreases because there is less rain falling within the catchment of the springs, then it becomes less turbulent, and sometimes it becomes ephemeral, not permanent water body, so they will have to retreat. But they've got nowhere to retreat because they live at the very tops of our not very high mountains.
Mm.
So some species can be translocated, but we can't build a mountain higher
Uh,
than we already have. Theoretically possible, not very practical.
would take a lot of energy to create a new alpine region.
We would have to do what they've done in Dubai with artificial mountains.
Mm. Well,
So yeah, it's a little bit depressing, but one thing to remember that the Earth is a self-repairing, self-managing system. Even human impacts is not going to last forever. It feels like a horrible thing, but not in geological time. Like 100,000 years is not a very long time in the life of the planet. So we're a
no.
bit of a, as the comedian said, we're a bit of a surface nuisance for the planet.
Well, and we're the biggest threat to wiping ourselves out and removing ourselves from the planet in terms of that geological time where humanity represents just
Mm,
one little centimeter up the back end of the whole show.
that's right. That's right. Well, I wouldn't go as far as saying that we wipe ourselves out unless something drastic happens,
Yeah.
like a global nuclear war or something like that. Hopefully not. But it's hard to see how we can sustain the current number of people and the current intensity of our living. So the easiest thing probably for us is to reduce our numbers, and we're already doing that very successfully. Every country except for like India and Africa. And even India and Africa, the demographic growth is over,
Hmm.
pretty much.
When people think of biodiversity, as you said at the start of this, that it's about koalas or it's the last few tigers that are left and these bigger animals.
Mm.
They're not out there thinking about the stonefly in the Alpine region or the water
And
bugs.
I can't
Um,
blame them.
it's not as easy to create a poster or a campaign for those
Yeah.
animals, but you've managed to find them endlessly curious in your career. What are the things that you find most curious and fascinating about invertebrates, and what brought you into studying them?
I don't know, to be honest. It's one of those mental aberrations, perhaps. But it would be true to say that I was fascinated with bugs since very young age. It could be part of my mental makeup. And when you look at kind of inspired scientists, often they have this unhealthy fascination with their subject, and there's nothing wrong with that. Yeah. But the society at large is also changing, I have to say. Like there was a proposal to build a mountain bike trail right on top of the habitat of this insignificant stonefly. Mind you, that's locally endemic, doesn't occur anywhere else, listed in international IUCN, like
Is this the
international,
Australian stonefly or the ones over
the
in Europe?
Australian stonefly, the
Yeah.
Australian stonefly. And along with a couple of other species that are restricted to that area and just the whole sensitivity of the habitat, the long story short, it was rejected, and
Nice.
partly because of the stonefly. So people decided that, okay, we can have a mountain bike trail, but maybe like across the road where,
Mm,
it doesn't go through sensitive, wet rainforest.
yeah.
Cool. It's a cool, cold rainforest, which is very rare. And if it burns, it doesn't regrow. I was pleasantly surprised, although I tried to keep the straight face of a expert because my role was to provide information. But I was like, wow, didn't expect that to happen. And people do slowly realize that once you lose something, well, you can't make it back. Like, there is this whole movement of de-extinction, but you can't really do what they describe in Jurassic Park. It's not really, you can't bring the wolf once it's extinct, or like, well, we're working a thylacine. and it's still a work in progress, and it's
Mm.
millions of dollars. We can spend a fraction of that money just to preserve what we already have. It's a great work if it's possible, great, although it's arguable whether the habitat exists for this species or not, and so on, whether should we bring the woolly mammoth back outside of even if we can. Yeah, there is
People may
kind of
just
this strange.
poach it again and turn it into woolly
Oh,
coats.
I mean, it obviously captures people's imagination. To me, it's like a little child play, which is nothing wrong with that. It
Well,
comes down to what you love and
yeah,
why you love it.
it points to the interconnectedness between every animal and their habitat, and that the ecology is almost always reflects a certain species, where, say, that this alpine rainforest is where the stonefly has probably lived for hundreds of thousands of years, and they're an inseparable entity, almost the one thing. And
Yeah.
this, the world has changed so much now that has to be a change in the species, for better or for worse. Are there new species emerging, or is there just a complete reduction? And what's filling these gaps now?
Mm. Well, we're going back to stonefly. Yes, it is so interconnected with its environment. So it lives in what is called ecological island. So it is so kind of evolved together with its habitat, which is this ephemeral streams that only flow a few months of the year. And so nothing else can sort of occupy it. That they actually lost their wings. They're completely wingless
Mm.
because they don't need to fly anywhere else. It actually saves energy growing wings and doing this whole flapping.
Interesting.
It's an interesting phenomenon that occurs like in alpine areas, but also in very restricted habitats. There is one stonefly sorry, I keep talking about stoneflies.
No,
It's so fascinating.
yeah, fascinating.
That lives in low stream, like not in alpine areas, but it needs this little waterfalls. So there is this one area in one stream that has this waterfalls, and the whole stream doesn't the whole river doesn't have any other waterfalls nearby. So the stonefly evolved to not flying so it can stay in this bloody waterfalls. Well, I'm working on this currently. Doing research on amphipods, which is like, for your listeners, if you like pull up a rock in a garden, there is this jumping things. So they're little crustaceans and they're jumpy, and they're called amphipods because of amphibious, because their habitat crosses from terrestrial to freshwater. So these guys, they live in fresh water, but they kind of are like really at the very edge, like they live in leaf packs, or some species do. So we've been researching them because two species of this, what they call Dandenong amphipod, they're thought to be extinct for 60 years, and then got rediscovered.
Okay.
And then what we thought of them is just two species in the Dandenongs. But it turns out that there is like probably close to a dozen species according to our DNA barcoding data. So one of these species has these disconnected populations that kind of look like almost separate species, but not quite. We call them lineages, which points out that the one species was distributed on a larger area, but then with drying of the mainland that has occurred a few thousand years ago, its population has fragmented and is definitely disconnected because they can't fly from one population to another. They have no wings, they're crustaceans.
Gotcha.
And the streams are completely disconnected. And you can see that genetically are they different, but not different enough to call them species. And also their body shapes is really similar. So based on that, we call them lineages, but another 1,000 years, if they don't disappear, we'll maybe turn them into separate species. So speciation that is occurring because nothing, like all other processes, are still occurring. It is just slow in comparison to human life.
It's interesting you say within maybe 1,000 years, because I think evolution's on all these different scales, yeah. And if you go down to a microorganism, they're evolving much more rapidly, and then beetles can evolve more rapidly and differentiate over a shorter amount
Yeah,
of time than, say, like a primate or a mammal. So there is that opportunity for the ecosystem to bounce back or adapt to a changing environment at that
yeah.
smaller level for invertebrates.
Yes, absolutely. And these changes, they are studied in labs around the world. The classic object for studying of genetics and evolution is Drosophila fly, because it has like well-known mutations that can be recognized. And also it's the whole lifespan from like an egg to adult is a couple of weeks.
Mm.
So you can have multiple generations in a lab, hundreds of generations, and you can see what will happen, say, if you will affect them with a high temperature or just have some kind of a selective evolution, where evolution selects for smaller, larger, less flying animals, that kind of stuff. So we know a lot about evolutionary processes thanks to this little fly.
And out of interest, what, with, say, a native species that you've studied in these environments, and then looking at other species that might have come from other continents, and then maybe predator-prey relationships, or which species might be dominating in a landscape, has the, I guess, the globalization of organisms very much now impacted Australia in your studies to see those organisms from
There is
other continents?
there are a couple of in fresh water. There are a couple of snails. One of them is from New Zealand. Another one is from US. That has definitely, you can see them. They're very tolerant to organic pollution, and sometimes you take a kind of yeah, I use a sweeping net to catch bugs. We were sampling downstream of a sewage treatment plant, and I thought, oh, my net is full of mud, and usually you can wash it off the net, but I couldn't seem to wash that mud. But this whole mud, this like a big black lump, was all snails.
Wow.
Yeah, sometimes they clog up like water pipes, water supply pipes. Yeah, very effective at reproducing. And another example, which even more influencing in freshwater ecosystems, is this mosquito fish that has been brought deliberately to fight mosquito larvae, to get rid of mosquito larvae. But of course, it eats everything else. So that's like when you see guppy,
Yeah.
guppies are pretty much a glorified form of mosquito fish. Their mouth is upturned a little bit. They can survive in really harsh conditions with really poor water quality. And even if there is almost no oxygen in the water, they can sort of gulp air from the surface and survive that way. So extremely persistent. They don't lay eggs, so one female can burst with young fish. It's quite fascinating,
That's
but
a bit of
really quite scary because they kind of die off with cold temperature in winter.
yeah.
But then as the water warms up, they just reproduce exponentially. And you can tell where they are if you go to any urban stream. And if the water is not flowing very fast and the surface is still, you will see like the circles on the water, little ripples.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, you just go, oh, little fishies, oh, how cute. Well, that's those little fishes that eat everything else. They're like little piranhas. Frog
Okay.
eggs, including frog
Wow.
eggs. And they will attack young tadpoles when they're hungry. And yeah, so they are noxious species. Carp is another one.
Yeah.
Also, people don't realize that trout is introduced. It's not native Australian fish, and it's a very hungry fish. And Australian waters are not built to support high biomass. This is because we're a very old continent, and as you know from your studies of soil and minerals, most of the nitrogen has leached out. Our mountains are not very high. It's not like New Zealand. So that's a good indicator that we are very old. So nitrogen has leached out from our soils. We have about 10 times less nitrogen in our waters and in our soils, which basically means the streams can't support high biomass unless we start fertilizing them, which will lead to blue-green algae blooms. So fish like trout, they rely on prey in high abundance, and we just can't provide it. Our native fish are these galaxies that just kind of, this big. We can't support fish this big unless they really live in large streams like Mare. People say, oh, what about Mare cod? Yeah, but it's not going to live in these small streams. It requires huge streams like Mare River, or relatively huge. So it's an interesting story about this nitrogen connection and why you can't introduce trout effectively into our streams. Many anglers would sometimes catch a fish and it will be a small trout, but it's going to be very old because it just can't grow. That's what I have learned from fish surveys while working at Melbourne Water.
They've got not enough food to even get into a proper growth.
Yeah. So large trout in Tasmania, slightly different stories, but they wiped out all of their small native crayfish, which is a problem.
Why is
Yeah.
that? Why are they better for that?
I
The
think mainly
nitrogen again?
because don't know, to be honest. Could be something to do with glaciation affecting Tasmania and not
Yeah.
the mainland.
Yeah.
Don't know.
And it seems like a similar theme is that as ecosystems degrade, then more invasive species can take root because they're a bit more dominant, and that's sort of survival of the fittest playing out for the
Well,
current trends in the environment.
there are two things playing. There is number one, that we facilitate transport of species from one place to another.
Yeah.
And by creating quick changes, we create niches for this species. So the proliferation of introduced species is not it's a symptom rather than a problem.
Okay.
So we the problem is, for example, that we create less habitat for native fish and more habitat for carp. And the symptom of it is more carp. So don't, like, they're messengers. Like, we can't just say, oh, bloody carp, it ruined our streams. Well, it's not really. It's just they are because we created a niche for them. It's the same, yeah. So if we start clearing land and bring rabbits, guess what's going to happen? But if we don't clear the land and bring the rabbits, well, there will be a stack of predators that will be right on top of them.
In my hometown, they used to throw a carp fishing competition every year in the spring and invite all the fishers along to pull out as many carp as possible. And it was the biggest carp won the prize, and
Yeah, it's easy to do.
turned into fertilizer, basically.
That's quite unfortunate because most of the world eats carp very enthusiastically because it is kind of the biggest biomass in most streams in the world. It's been introduced to places like Mississippi where it's just crazy. You've seen the videos of carp jumping and smacking people on the face.
Yeah, they get big.
Edible.
There
We
were
did
people
this
who would eat them, and
platform.
they would put them in a pool and feed them lettuce maybe for a week before eating them.
The trick is to put them on ice, which reduces their stress when they
Yeah.
die. They kind of like basically go to sleep. So if you put them in the ice slurry in your esky, that will taste better. And also when you prepare them, you just cut out those red lines, which are very close to the bone, to the middle of the fillet, and just cut it out. I know a guy, that very guy won a cooking competition, and he prepared carp sushi, so it can't be that bad.
There we go.
I once prepared fish balls made out of carp, brought them to work. It was like a cup day, but everybody was working, but it's like it was a bit of a function. It was at uni. And everybody liked it, and I said, it's made out of carp. And people like, ha ha ha, good joke, Eddie. I'm like, no, really, it is. I know it's hard to believe. Also, there is this ABC fantastic documentaries about eating your invaders. And there was a thing about carp. And they set Aussies and they gave them like fish and chips prepared in different ways. And people like, okay, this is not carp, but this tastes nice. I'm like, oh, actually, it is carp. So most people will say the carp is disgusting. And when you say, have you ever tried it? People say no.
No, exactly. Exactly right. But they go down to the shops and they buy the snapper that's frozen and imported from China or Vietnam or somewhere else.
Well, it's also that, but like you know, we all run around and we all talk about protein and how we don't have it and how it's hard to produce. Well, look, it's under our feet. It's kangaroo, it's rabbits, it's carp. Let's just eat them for God's sake rather than converting, grasslands into pastures, spending massive amounts of money watering this thing.
Or the thousands of wild brumbies they shoot from helicopters in Alpine regions.
Absolutely. You go to Europe, everybody eats horses.
Yeah. There's a
And
lot
it's
of
like,
stigma
yeah,
in the
they're just,
Western
they're
mind.
just wild animals. Yeah.
So
Anyway,
we've covered a lot of depressing factors about nature and
but
ecosystems. And
everything's gonna be
oh,
okay.
tell us how it's going to be okay, Eddie.
I already mentioned that the things are going to change, but they will have to recalibrate themselves. There will be equilibrium because that's how natural and physical systems work. We just going towards this equilibrium. We may or may not like that equilibrium, but equilibrium will be achieved. It's just how comfortable it's going to be for us.
There's a thing called eco-anxiety out there, and for a young child who's opening up their mind and curiosities to the world, they're quite a young child, maybe anyone under the age of 12, and even teenagers are all trying to think, what's this world made of? Where do I fit into it? How can I participate in a meaningful way? And some of these conversations are important to have at a certain stage in development. Some of these conversations are best had to not having them at certain stages of development. And then, especially, I think once you hit the teenage years, you're going to be exposed to a lot of this information. What are some ways in which children can begin to participate, still feel connected to nature, not be afraid of the changes, do something practical? What are these things that you're thinking about, Eddie?
Yes, and as you can see, this is where the second half of my life that runs in parallel to my research life comes in. And
And that's butterfly adventures.
it's all about closeness to nature. And because I study insects, insects are very close to my heart, and butterflies are probably one of the few insects that people emotionally relate to and happy to have on their hand and admire and are really quite emotionally connected to. So I think when children begin to grow and understand their world, it's good not to pile up world's problems on their little heads too much.
Yeah.
So their world grows slowly from their crash to their backyard. And, their world is small, but their world is fascinating. And what we want them to do and to feel is that is how amazing and fascinating that world is, and not as dangerous as some parents think. And so when I started with this company, Butterfly Adventures, I started with displaying butterflies in like an enclosure at schools, kinders, and festivals. And to my surprise, older people started to come up to me and they would say, "Oh, monarch butterflies, I remember them." My parents would, so that's 50, 60-year-olds, they will say, my parents would bring a branch of this plant with caterpillars on it, put it in a shoebox, and let me watch it forming pupa, and then a butterfly would hatch and we would release it. One of the best memories of my life, of my childhood. I'm like, okay, clearly that had massive positive impact on these then children, now adults, having their own children. So I thought we need to recreate this tradition, and so this is where the Chrysalis Kit came from. So we've worked out how to hang little chrysalis inside a little box like that. I've got this enclosure here.
Oh,
There
yeah.
we go, in focus, yeah. And then people watch the chrysalis develop and hatch into a butterfly, and I can release it again. So that's kind of I think is a fantastic thing to do with their kids. It doesn't have to be a purchased product, by the way. You can do it with, you can pick up a piece of cabbage leaf and do exactly the same thing. Okay, maybe cabbage moth is actually cabbage white butterfly that is an agricultural pest, but that's in the fields. In the city, well, it's just another very accessible butterfly.
Yeah.
You can, I don't know, you can watch what is going on in the worm farm. You can look at what the bees are doing. You can see how many different bugs you can find in your backyard, or if you don't have a backyard, in your local park, near your local creek. There are lots of things you can do to kind of be contemplative and observe. And I'm just looking at the paper that has been published a few days ago, where it says how important this contemplative nature engagement practices, such as reflection, meditation, and introspection, on the well-being of people, and particularly, young kids and their parents as well, because they are quite distressed. Like, young parents are really seriously, as you say, distressed with what's going to happen, because every day you see that the forests are degrading, that they don't absorb carbon dioxide as we thought that they will for a few more years, that the oceans are getting warmer, and that could create all sorts of existential crises for us. And I'm not saying it's exaggeration, but the fact is that people see this problem as too big for them to do anything about, but a problem that will affect their lives and their children's lives. And we know there will be more frequent bushfires and this kind of thing. It's really quite serious, but at the same time, we need to kind of calm down a little bit and observe what we have already and what we still have left, and enjoy it. But nature will sort itself. And we, as part of the nature, we and the rest of the natural world, we and the rest of the natural world will need to rebalance.
Yeah.
And if we don't do it consciously, it will happen for us.
Yeah, I think there's a lesson in there, which is the world is changing, and us stressing out about it isn't going to do anything positive other than continue to ruin our own health and disturb the minds of our children. But there are things that we can do, like remain curious and remain excited and continue to explore and advocate and learn about this beautiful world and
Yes.
everything that
Worst
is.
thing that can happen is that when people say, "Ah, you know what? I can't change anything. I can't do anything. Oh, bugger it. Let's just destroy something else, or let's just let it all happen. Let's just have a. It's going to go anyway. I just want to live in a big house, and I want to just use as much resources as I can because it's all going down the drain anyway." So there is this kind of a way of thinking. On the other extreme, people like, look, let's just preserve everything. Don't people get really upset about things that can't change, like people denying the climate.
Mm,
We just need to kind of, I think, respectively just say that they're wrong. It's very important for humanity to realize what is happening without killing ourselves over it,
yeah,
because it's just not going to help anyone.
right.
So, as always, there are two extremes, like there are in every issue. Maybe not super helpful, but they balance each other and they have their role. I
Mm,
think the eco-extremists have their role, but also climate deniers have their role because they challenge mainstream science. And so mainstream science comes up with really good argument, really good information that it's undeniable to the rest of us.
back to the contemplative practices about nature, you could say that the development process of the monarch butterfly is a development practice. And I love that quote that you gave there from the older generations who'd come in and said, this was one of the most powerful things in my childhood. What was that plant that you said looks like a swan? And is that something that
Water.
people could say grow in their backyards and would attract the monarch butterfly naturally?
Unfortunately, it's an introduced plant, and in some states, it's in Western Australia, I think it's a part of the noxious weeds.
Okay.
It's from family as so there are a few species, but we don't encourage people to grow it necessarily. But we do grow it ourselves, obviously, but we grow it in our farm in a very controlled environment so that it doesn't spread.
In a greenhouse.
What we do encourage people to do is to grow plants that will attract native butterflies.
Okay.
And some of those plants are incredibly beautiful, like everlastings of different species. So that will attract Australian painted lady butterfly as a host plant, so the caterpillar will feed on it. But it will also attract a host of other insects because it's such a showy flower and provides lots of nectar.
Oh, great. And
Things
is there,
eucalyptus provides source of nectar
mm,
for butterflies. So yeah, it's also people have lemon tree in their backyard. All they have to do is not spray it and watch a native swallowtail butterfly come and lay eggs.
okay, the butterfly.
There is a orchard butterfly and dainty orchard butterfly, so smaller species. You'll see them in summer in Melbourne.
I'll keep an eye out
Hmm.
for them on our lemon tree.
Yes, do.
Is there
Quite
anything you'd like to
fantastic.
show us, Eddie?
I can probably show us our Chrysalis kit,
Yeah,
what it looks like if I can share my screen.
yeah. You might be best to turn your screen blur off just for this one.
Oh yeah, well, we'll see how we go.
Okay.
Can you see
Oh,
that?
yeah, sure.
So can you see my cursor?
Yes.
So this is a chrysalis or pupa, and we attach this little hook to it.
Yeah.
We send it carefully wrapped. We send it in a post, and it comes in a little cube. I like to say, RSPCA would not like me to call it a cage. So I had a few very upset people once contacting me saying, "You can't keep butterflies in cages. It's so cruel." And I totally agree with them. But what we have here is basically kind of a safe shelter for butterfly to hatch. And the
Yeah.
reason we use this little cube, which is it's actually handmade in Philippines,
Okay.
they have quite strict practices there of labor. So it's not slave labor.
Yeah.
I think they call it a backup plant. It's like a natural fiber. So it's the same material that the hats are made for the Cup Day that is coming up.
Okay.
And it's really good for butterflies to hang on to because butterflies don't have like suckers on their feet like flies, for example. All they have is a couple of hooks. And when they hatch, they need to hold on to something, especially when they spread their wings. So this little enclosure is ideal, and you can keep it. And you can keep other bugs in it, or you can keep whatever you like in it, or you can order another chrysalis, which would be much cheaper, and have it hatched in there again. So it takes about a week for a butterfly to hatch.
Do they need
Very,
anything whilst they're in the chrysalis form?
keep it away from direct sun or any harsh conditions, and maybe mist it every couple of days with water, just making sure there is humidity maintained and it
Okay.
doesn't get dehydrated. But once it actually kind of progresses, and then you can see outline of wings through the chrysalis skin, so you will see orange wings appearing. It's really quite amazing and beautiful.
What is the chrysalis
Gold.
made out of?
So this is a process of transformation of caterpillar cells into butterfly cells, and cells that migrate into new positions, and they're changing their function. And so wherever they grow muscles for the wings and legs, and they grow a new head and new mouth parts. All of that, it's this big rearrangement of cells. That's what happens over a couple of weeks inside the chrysalis. And it's really quite a fascinating process. How does one cell know where to go and what to become? It's a mystery. The outside of it, it's clearly kind of adapted for a little bit of camouflage. So it's green, like the green of the leaves, and it's got these golden dots,
Yeah.
which kind of mimic little rays of light. When it's hanging under a leaf, it's very difficult to spot.
Okay.
But it becomes like a jewelry. People say, "Oh, is it like a jewelry?" Because we now use earring hooks
Yeah.
to glue to them. So for all purposes, kind of looks like a piece of jewelry.
That's what I
Which
thought
one?
it was when I first saw it.
And so yeah, you will see this orange wings appearing, and a butterfly like that will eventually come out. And what we say to people is just wait a couple of days until the wings strengthen, and then they can make a wish and whisper that wish to a butterfly. That's great for kids. And
Yeah.
it's this emotional connection, and release the butterfly.
And how long do they live after they've birthed into the world?
Monarchs, which they originally come from America, but they kind of naturalized themselves here about 150 years ago. They live for about 5 weeks.
Yeah.
It's a relatively long time.
Yeah.
They create overwintering generation.
Yeah.
So the shortening of the day stimulates juvenile hormone inside the caterpillar, and they produce this long-living generation, which can live up to 2-3 months.
Wow.
It's like bees that overwinter.
And if you've
So that's what
got
happens.
and if you got a few chrysalises and then you had some of that plant in there and they hatched, we might even see the opportunity for them to breed and start the cycle again.
So this plant, it grows throughout Queensland and, well, probably parts of Victoria. people used to have it. It was you know how there is a fashion on certain plants.
Yeah.
People used to have it on their backyard, and then fashion kind of disappeared, and they don't anymore.
Okay.
I think we don't have to have this particular plant with this particular butterfly. There are lots of beautiful native butterflies that we can attract.
Yeah.
If we plant chocolate lilies, plant kangaroo paws, you can find that there is this Australian admiral, which is also quite a pretty butterfly, and it's attracted to stinging nettle. And there is European stinging nettle, but there is also Australian stinging nettle.
Yeah.
Yes, smaller leaf, and it doesn't die out during summer like European species does.
Yeah.
So if you can plant that, you can probably find it in the wild. It's got tons and millions of seeds. All you have to do is collect a few seeds, put the gloves on, throw a few of them in a shady corner of your backyard. There will be habitat for butterflies.
Well, it sounds like there's a lot of different species and plants that relate to those species. Is there a good place where people can go to find out more information about butterflies and the plants that support them?
Well,
Other than this podcast, of course.
Melbourne Zoo is a probably great place
Okay.
to see that. There is also Bugs Alive at Museum Victoria, which just opened a new exhibition, by the way, that looks at different ecosystems and different biomes, if you like. So they have this like a soil, by the way, corner, and it shows what animals live in there and how they support the soil health. There is like the world of ice, and there is a world of forests. So it's really good coming in, going there with your kids, and yeah, learning about not just butterflies, but the rest of the natural world as well. But in there they have Bugs Alive, where you can see a lot of insects and spiders and some other invertebrates in the flesh. While the zoo has a really cool butterfly house, this massive butterfly enclosure.
Sounds fantastic. People should definitely get along to that.
But
What's the
also our
most...
website.
Yes, well, your
Talks
website will
about
have all...
butterflies.
Yeah, we'll have all the links to your work with University of Melbourne and
Yes.
also butterflyadventures.com.au and your Facebook down below, so people can get involved in that. People can get a Chrysalis kit. People can get a stick insect kit.
A spiny leaf insect, for some reason, incredibly popular pet. So
They are very cool.
through keeping animals, people also kind of get to appreciate and look after something that is quite easy to look after,
Definitely.
and they make no noise. Bonus. I call them gateway pet.
Gateway pet. It is. It's a low maintenance, doesn't make much noise, isn't going to mess up your house.
No, even their poop smells like eucalyptus.
When it passes on, it's maybe not as sad as a puppy, so it's a good training.
Yeah, and you can frame them. A little bit of taxidermy.
Totally. Yeah, I have a stick insect taxidermy in my collection also, so that's for sure. Eddie, what is the most powerful change that we can make as a culture to improve the lives of children for generations to come?
Well, I think the latest, I actually looked it up, this question, and the latest research shows that we, as society, will have disproportional benefit if we look after young parents and allow parents time and resources to look after their kids, especially from like pregnancy to 2.5 years. So they call it first 1,000 days. And I like to think that kind of our work contributes to it somewhat. But it's that if we allow parents the comfort of time and resources to bring up their kids, and so they don't have to rush from work to daycare to cooking dinner and stressed out of their heads especially they've got more than one young kid, and they actually have time to go to their local park and relax and have a picnic and look at butterflies and look at caterpillars and learn about bird songs and recognize the frog calls and look at the night sky. It improves their lives, and it really positively affects their mental health. And as a consequence, the society will be better off with healthier people who are not carrying the stresses and distress from their childhood on to their adult life. They don't have trauma that we all talk about now, and we realize that lasts sometimes longer than lifetime. If you traumatize a kid and their parents, well, that trauma will carry on for a long time. Well, I've got an uncle who's a geneticist, and he brought to my attention that the epigenetic effects of traumatizing a mother who is pregnant with a daughter, her fetus already has eggs of a new generation. So if a pregnant mother is traumatized, that will affect 2 generations, because it will affect those eggs inside her fetus because they're formed inside an embryo. So that I find it quite fascinating.
Great answer, Eddie. Very powerful wisdom there. And yeah, it's so true. We can all benefit from those lessons and really truly digesting them properly and not turning away from the truths that have been learned about in this podcast, but leaning into them with a bit of curiosity, I think goes a long way. And I think that, yeah, your work is definitely a good demonstration of that. It's been awesome to have you on the show, and yeah,
Thank
thanks.
you
We'll
very
have to
much.
have more conversations into the future.
Sure, we'll see how we go, but everything's going to be all right.
Okay, cool. All right, thanks, listeners. I hope you enjoyed the show, and just remember that life rocks.
It does.
Thanks, Eddie. Yeah,
Cheers.
that was great.